Good morning, everyone. I'm Wade Fox. I want to welcome you to this special edition of Second Opinion. We have got a very interesting guest with us today, Miss Valerie Wormell. Valerie is a ex-Board of Selectman here in Westford. I'm kind of calling her in as an expert opinion leader for a discussion on a very interesting subject, which is basically how we do budgeting, but more or less how the override affects what we're doing. So Valerie, thank you so much for coming in.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Wade.
Well, good. As we talked about this, one of the things I wanted to kind of tell Val about is the fact that we've got a lot of new people moving into town, and they don't always understand how the town budgeting process goes along, particularly when you have things like town meetings and warrant articles and so forth. So Val, I'd like to start off, and if you could just kind of give us a general overall view of how the town goes about budgeting, what the Board of Selectmen look for from all of the departments, and how you kind of build it up and what you do.
Okay, I can only speak from my experience on the Board of Selectmen a few years back. And the budgeting process actually begins in the middle of summer. The Board of Selectmen will meet and they'll lay out goals for the town for that year. With the town manager and assistant town manager's input, they'll lay out kind of a strategic plan. After the goals are voted on by the selectmen, the selectmen also solicit input from their constituents and other boards and committees. So it is a compilation of what the entire elected body sees as what the direction the town would like to go. Then the town manager takes off and runs with it. She meets with all of her department heads and tries to figure out a way to make those goals happen. She'll come back and she'll report, our town manager, by the way, is Jody Ross. She'll come back and report, is it something that can be done in 1 year? Is it a goal that we need to address over multiple years? But she kind of lays out a plan. After a little more discussion with the selectmen, she'll go back and start the budgeting process and meeting with every town department to kind of see what their needs are. You know, do they see something that the town needs that the Board of Selectmen may not have recognized when they set their goals? And that takes you almost into late October. So then the town manager will come back with an initial budget and open discussion between the Finance Committee, the Board of Selectmen, and town departments.
So at this point, when you have this and the town managers put all this together, and the Finance Committee gets together and they look at this, they look at the total needs of the town and they say, well, it's within what we would normally consider the 2.5% growth rate that they might put on the budget for tax increases or something like that. I mean, how do they say, okay, we can meet the budget without raising taxes based upon what?
Okay, that's always the starting point because you have to have a balanced budget. But within that budget setting process, the Board of Selectmen along with the Finance Committee set a number of assumptions. In other words, the most important thing we'll do is pay our debt obligations first. We'll try and meet every contractual obligation. So we have contracts, labor contracts with all of our employees, and we will meet those obligations because it's already been negotiated and approved. And just go through the list of assumptions and try and meet all of those. If for some reason the town manager comes back and says, oh, I just can't meet this assumption, she'll lay it out for the selectmen and the Finance Committee and tell us by how much there might be a miss.
So after they get through all of this, and hopefully there's a unanimity about what everybody agrees with, how is that, it goes to town meeting, is that correct?
That's a little further down the road. in November, what we call budget hearings start. And that's where they're public, they're televised so that anybody can watch. But the Finance Committee, Board of Selectmen, and Town Manager meets with every department to find out, why they put forward the budget that they did. What's the explanation? Is there an increase? Or did we realize a cost efficiency in a particular area? It's, in some regard, within the departments, they have an opportunity to highlight something that they have done very well with regard to the taxpayers. It gives them some, I don't want to say fame, but it just gives them an opportunity to highlight the good work that they do as well.
So if we get to this point and everybody's done the best job they could and everything, and it turns out that to balance the budget, we have to raise taxes 4%. What happens? I'm just picking a number, but let's just say
picking a number, the 4% that's a high one. Then they'll enter some very serious negotiations as to, is it necessary? Is it a service we can live without, or a service level that we can live with? If they find they absolutely cannot do it, then the selectmen always have the authority to put an article on the warrant asking, or a question on the ballot asking voters for additional funding in the form of an override.
So at that, thank you for bringing that up. So the question is, we in the public hear a lot about the 2.5 prop override. So can you kind of tell us the background of that and what that means?
Okay, Proposition 2.5 was a piece of legislation that was passed in 1980. Prior to 1980, it was almost, depending upon if you talk to the proponents, the wild, wild west. Taxes could increase at any percentage level based upon what the schools, the various departments felt was their need. And Proposition 2.5 was that legislation that kind of capped taxes. You can't raise taxes more than 2.5% in any one year. It's a little more complicated than just that explanation.
That's good enough. Yeah, okay. I guess what I was asking is that when we talk about an override, okay, is that really meaning that we're asking the taxpayers to pay above the 2.5%?
Yes.
That's whatever it may be.
Yes.
I said 4%, but we're paying above that 2.5%.
And it's permanent.
And it's permanent.
Unlike a debt exclusion that is a temporary increase in taxes, usually for building and construction.
So it would be part of the town managers, or I get Board of Selectmen and Finance, to if you're going to ask for this, it's really for a broad base need that's going to occur. I guess what I'm saying is that you'd have to look out and say we're going to see that we're doing something for the community over many years. That means we need this for a certain broad-based approach versus individual things.
A community can choose, or its Board of Selectmen can choose to do it many different ways. They can ask for a very specific purpose, such as an increase in service level. Say, Westford doesn't have a fire department, and this would have been 100 years ago. We don't have a fire department. We need a fire department, so we're going to hire firefighters. It's not something out of ordinary, so we're going to increase service level, so we need to raise more revenue. Or you can take a broad-based approach. And
so if the Board of Selectmen put this on the town meeting, the warrant article, and it goes to the town meeting, and it passes, it goes to the ballot, correct?
Today, yes.
Yeah, okay. If for some reason the town meeting said no, what happens then?
Then you fall back on the budget presented at town meeting, and so there might not be a service level increase.
Okay. So I'm really kind of getting up to our main subject, which on at this current override, is even though things were passed in the town meeting, the ballot as it's written, if people say no, we don't like this, we don't want it, and it's voted down, what does that mean? What happens at that point? Do they have to go back and redo this?
No. You're kind of taking me in a different direction.
Okay.
I want to take a step back.
Okay.
Westford hasn't had a property tax override, a permanent increase to our tax levy since, I don't know, it's been decades. The last attempt was 2005, and it failed. And at that time, the way it worked was we had a ballot question first. We had our town elections first and then went to town meeting, where town meeting was pretty much a rubber stamp on whatever the voters did at during the election. We have since moved our town meeting forward in the calendar year, but town elections fall later. So now we have a town meeting kind of pre-approving our ballot question before we even get there. How it's all going to work out in the long run, I can only speculate, but this is all new for us.
So the newness, I guess, is what I'm going to ask, and that's one of the reasons why people have asked about trying to clarify this. The override is being driven not by a broad-based need. It's being driven by the school committee.
Okay.
It basically, they came to us and said, we want an override for a group of people that we're representing, whatever you want to call it. And that went through town meeting, and people have opinions on both sides. But as you said, that's permanent. And there's no contract that's permanent, nor was there a contract that had been basically approved, from what I understand, when we went to town meeting. So my question is, as you said, it's permanent. We're being asked to do an override that will stay with us. It's not like, as you said, the debt exclusion, right?
Right.
Okay.
So we pay off the debt, and that part of the taxes we're asked to pay goes away.
So given the fact that, for example, to a point we were talking about, we've managed to fund a fairly aggressive building program in schools over the last 20 years, but we never did an override for the schools. It was debt exclusion?
Well, the construction, the actual building of the schools was by debt exclusion, and we are still paying for those through our taxes. But staffing the schools, hiring all the teachers and nurses and custodians and all the people that make that school work for the student was done without an override. It involved some foresight, some very good timing on the part of town leaders at the time, recognizing that we had a number of school teachers that would be retiring. Obviously, if you've been with the school department for a very long time, your salary is a little higher than, say, a new hires. So we were able to time it such that there were a number of retirees leaving just as we brought in new teachers. So we were able to slowly build up and fund salaries for new teachers without putting forth an override.
Okay, Val. I thank you for the background.
There was also a bit of an austerity program in place at that time. There were hiring freezes, spending freezes, and very little investment in capital.
but that was promoted, or that was told at the time, right? People could see that they were being asked to give more, but yet they saw some actions to tighten up the belt, and
Yes.
even if we've tightened it up,
We were able to do it.
we're going to do it. The reason why I think we wanted to have this is as we've talked, you've described what the process was in the past, and as you said, we've kind of moved things around a little bit. How do you see it's changed in this process versus what was done in your 12 years?
Yeah, when I was about 9. Don't exaggerate. Don't make it long. How has it changed? In the long run, I think the outcomes will be the same. The voter during the election will have the final say. And town meeting had always respected the ballot vote. They always had the opportunity to change, vote differently, but they never did. They always just respected the vote, the final vote. Here now we have, we're going to go and ask voters to increase their taxes voluntarily. And I guess you have to think through the scenarios. They might say yes, and the school committee's discussion during town meeting was it was their intention to increase teachers' compensation. And I assume they're going to do that. But voters might say no, so the school committees, I assume, would still has the goal of increasing teacher compensation. It's just a matter of how they're going to go about accomplishing that and in what time frame.
And that's part of the ongoing negotiations. I understand when we went to town meeting, they had not gotten into negotiations with the union, which I think some people found a little disturbing, because it's like, you're voting to say this is the pot of gold we've got, so it's not like the school committee could say no, we don't have anything. But in doing this, I understand also that it was for basically it was pushed as a teacher salary improvement process, but I understand that on the ballot it doesn't really say that. It's really for the school maintenance, school growth. It's kind of more of a organizational issue vote, not just strictly for the teachers.
Yeah, the ballot question is definitely not specific, but technically it's always been that way. When you go to town meeting, you vote the school budget. You vote the bottom line number. You cannot pick and choose which department within the school department you wish to fund more. There's a statute in Mass General Law, and I'm going to get the number wrong, but Chapter 71, Section 34, something or other, that if the town adopts that provision, then that's the way it operates. You only get to vote on that bottom line number. So when we go to the ballot, we have a bottom line number we're going to vote. But once it is, say it passes, it goes to the school department. Technically, there's no guarantee that they're going to use the money the way they promoted it. I think it would be folly for them not to. I don't think they're going to do that. But I really, under the law, they don't have to.
Okay. So two questions. Let's start off with the easy one. How does this impact the way we deal with the other unions in town that have different cycles on their contracts and so forth? Does it affect them at all, or is it somehow that's already built into the budget, or would they, let's say after this contract's over, the taxes are already up, is this like a preemptive tax increase? I don't know how to say it, but for other unions?
let's think about this.
Okay.
You and I have the same job.
Yeah.
We both contribute to a company, and I find out that you've got a raise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would expect if I'm performing up to standards that within my position, I should get a raise. So I think it's human nature that if you know that there is going to be raises given out, that you would hope that you would get the same, especially if you're doing a good job. Everybody needs to be compensated fairly. So I can't say, I think, yes, I think it's just natural that that would happen. In the past, Westford's policy on compensation had been 50% of what everyone else in the state gets, plus a little bit extra.
Mm-hmm.
You know, somewhere in the 5, 10, 15% range. And don't quote me on those numbers, but as a community, we had always tried to compensate our employees fairly. Every now and then, we would hire someone new at a significantly higher amount of compensation, just because we needed a better skill set out of that particular position. Mm-hmm. So how is it going to affect us going forward? It's reasonable to expect that everyone will want
more.
Yeah.
Okay. We would taxpayers would say more. They would say be fair. Okay. Yeah. Which kind of brings me to another little sidebar question, because you and I talked about this beforehand. And obviously you know more about it than I do, and so I was under the misconception that I always thought the school committee represented us, the taxpayers, because that they were supposedly to be our negotiating group versus the unions and everything else like that. In our discussion, you said, well, really they're supposed to promote the school system, and it's really the finance committee that kind of watches over all of this and speaks for the taxpayers. Really, in this process, how do you really see that working to where there's a lot of people probably like me that thought, well, you know, we elect them to represent the community, not necessarily the people we're having to deal with.
Well, we elect them to be advocates for the school system. So sometimes the process can be a little bit adversarial, you know, because let's face it, the school is a huge part of our budget. Well, 50%, sometimes a little more. It fluctuates from year to year. So it's not always fair to say that they're representing the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. Because they have their role is to represent the school.
But you would expect them to be a little fair about it.
Well, if you actually go through and read the current teacher's contract, it says that the school committee, and they put committee in quotes referring to it throughout the rest of the contract, that their role is to operate the school system in the most efficient and economical manner possible. That's okay. Right in the contract.
And well, I assume the contract with the taxpayers or the teachers?
Or the current contract with the teachers. So
maybe the taxpayers should get a contract with the school committee. Let me ask you, I mean, I understand that, but one of the questions I've got is when you have that dichotomy, particularly this year, where you've got a 2.5 override, and you have such a, I would say such a potential change in the Board of Selectmen and in the school committee. Mm-hmm. We've got a lot of people running, but we've also got a lot of people running because a lot of the incumbents are leaving. It's kind of interesting that right here at this, what I consider fairly important discussion thing, you can't really be mad at the people that have done it to you and say throw them out of office. They've already opted to leave. So the people that will be elected will be dealing with this going forward. And the question I ask is that after this is over, is it really a change that sets a new precedence about the way we do budgeting in this town? Because to me, it's like I don't see that this has really involved all the people that it should have to maybe get a better diverse thing. It was the advocates were advocating through, and that's what they're supposed to do. But the discussion that you talked about is that process in the past was somewhat moderated by trying to take a lot of things into concern and then coming up with a unified plan.
Yes.
And I think the way you describe it is it didn't quite work that way. It may, as you said, may end up at the same place, which is it's still in the hands of the voters. And I think that's really what I was asking you. Is like, do the voters still have a say in this?
Absolutely. Everyone needs to go get out and vote, study the issue, form your opinion, and vote accordingly. You know, it always rests in the hands of the voter. So I just go vote. So
Okay.
I already have my opinion formed. I really think that with enough notice and planning, we would have been more than capable of funding the additional $1.6 million that was asked. I think a better way of approaching the process would have been to negotiate a contract, even with additional compensation for teachers, contingent upon going back to going to the ballot and then back to town meeting for approval. I think that would have been the right approach from a taxpayer's perspective. Why there wasn't advance notice and planning. Well, I take that back. Superintendent Olson has been saying that the teachers were being paid less than a market basket of communities.
For a while.
As at least 3, maybe 4 years ago.
Okay.
And why they didn't work together to,
Solve it sooner.
yes.
Okay. Well, Val, I want to thank you a great deal for coming in. It's helped me learn a lot. I hope it's helped all of you learn. The election is May 2nd. It's not only the override we've talked about, but there's a lot of really great people running. I would suggest that fiscal conservatives might be the way to go, besides also looking at the ballot question. But please go out and vote. We have a lot of people at Town Hall can tell you where to go. And I just want to let you know that if you're ever confused, always make sure you get a second opinion.